All right, we're being recorded. Okay. In that case, I have to remove half my material. Just give me a second. All right. So I think the first thing to say about it is that what I don't want is for referees around the world, and in particular at community level, to think that this process is some kind of mystery, that there are secrets to be unlocked to the head contact process, that if only you hear from someone, you can unlock there's a key to it all, or that there's some kind of great mystery about how it gets applied or what the process is or anything like that. I think there was a little bit about that around the high tackle framework, and I don't think it's great for the game. So if anything we're going to try and do during this session, it's going to be to kind of demystify a lot of that stuff, keep things very simple, think about as simple approach as possible. And I think what's good is World Rugby's kind of adopted a little bit more simpler approach this time around, and we'll talk about that. Fundamentally, refereeing is about applying common sense. Now, I think everyone can agree that common sense isn't common. That's the joke, right? Otherwise we'd be just fine as a world. And so that's why we have a referee. And your job is to apply common sense to 30 people that may not be in the best position to demonstrate it. So with that in mind, that's what your role is there to do. And sometimes you can get distracted as to exactly what common sense is. But by and large, that's what we want to apply in the game. And I think we've got to remember the basics underpinning everything, that player safety is paramount, and I think we should never forget that as part of whenever we're applying any of these processes that come from World Rugby. That's a massively important part of what we're doing. So we'll talk a little bit about how that fits into that as well. So here's the high tackle framework, the decision-making framework for high tackles that was launched 2019. We have a definition of a shoulder charge. We have a definition of a high tackle. Is there shoulder or head contact, or have we just got contact with the arm? Is there a seatbelt tackle? We've got factors to consider for aggravation. We've got mitigating factors. And I'm not sure about you, but I've seen slightly easier processes for mortgage, requests and various different things through banks and whatever. You do need some form of tertiary education degree to understand this form. And I think that caused a little bit of frustration amongst the referee community. So, I don't know. At the time I wasn't with USA Rugby. At the time this was released, I was at Rugby Australia, where I worked for a while in referee education and development there. And the reaction was an immediate panic. Oh my gosh, everything's changed. The world is different. We've got, if you look at the form, contact with the head is a minimum yellow card. And all of a sudden everyone starts to panic. And I think that was not a brilliant piece of designed implementation of a policy. But nevertheless, there are a bunch of mitigating factors that, I don't know who Bert is. I think that's supposed to be Butt. So there are, if Bert's out there, Bert can calm down and just relax, because there are a bunch of mitigating factors, including indirect contact, which is listed as a mitigating factor. But all of a sudden, the moment you indicate that indirect contact with the head is a mitigating factor, you kind of put a different framework around the World Rugby framework. And so what you saw in the States and in Australia, and I think other countries, was a version of this kind of form. This is something that MLR used in 2019, where, they really worked out, okay, if you've got direct contact or indirect contact, that's where your sanctions change a little bit, because indirect contact will mitigate. And so you're dealing with a penalty or yellow versus a yellow or red for the different danger levels. This was Australia's graph or design, very similar kind of concept, but a little bit more obvious in sort of saying, here's direct contact, here's indirect contact. So we really had another framework put around the World Rugby framework as well, to sort of say, well, this is how this actually works out in real time. So who are these guidelines really for? So if this caused a bit of a panic at the time, and what was the point of them? And I think that we have to remember that when World Rugby puts these kinds of guidelines out, these things are not necessarily for community rugby referees. They are to be applied by community rugby referees, but they are very rarely written with community rugby referees actually in mind. They are written for beleaguered TMOs the world over. You know, the most put upon and difficult role you can possibly do in rugby. I don't know if, Chris, have you done any TMOing? I've done some. Have you done some or not yet?
I've been lucky enough to not have been done it, so I've passed on the responsibility to others, which is nice. So.
It is frightening in some cases because you know, there's a lot of pressure on you, and in some cases you're not in the best position to see certain things depending on what angles you get and how the director provides stuff to you. And plus, you're having three conversations at once. You're talking to the person that's driving the TMO stuff, you're talking to the director, and you're talking to the referee at the same time. And the whole point about this process was to provide some common language and some consistency. So it was written for World Cup referees who needed to be talking the same language. So when we talk about, you know, this with certain contact, a degree of force, and mitigation on this aspect or that aspect, what we're doing is we're bringing the theatre of rugby front and center in a way where everyone is talking the same language and things look consistent from one game to the next. Now, if anyone watched the World Cup, as Chris alluded to, I think it took a little while for that to actually shake down and be applied. But I think the notion that all of these mitigating factors here and all of these aspects around the flow chart could be applied by community rugby referees was a fairly big ask if you don't have slow motion cameras, you know, 4 different angles, and you kind of sit there and go, oh, okay, well, no, he ducked just slightly in a contact, therefore we can take this into account, therefore we come up with a decision that seems reasonable, that applies a common set of guidelines and can be sold to a community of people watching on television. At community level, sometimes we see the collision, go, holy crap, look at that, you know, and now I have to make a decision. And so I think, you know, are we in a position at that point to kind of go, well, everyone hold on a second while I go through my eight stage process of my flow chart, you know, to work out what my actual decision is supposed to be. That's a little unreasonable from a community referee point of view. So in applying the new framework, there's some really good news, I think, and a little bit of bad news. So let's talk about each of those. If we look at the previous framework, so on the screen, you should see there the previous high tackle framework. If you look at the high tackle, you'll kind of see the big one in the middle. You've got degree of danger, high or low, high red card, low yellow card, degree of danger, high red card, low yellow card. Now, you know, I studied logic at university, you know, but you don't need to be a complete genius to know that you might have actually reduced a couple of levels of this diagram if you just started with the degree of danger, because they're the only answers. If you've got high contact, you're getting a red card. If you've got low contact, you got a yellow card. Why didn't we just start there and remove 3 levels of the, you know, and then you have this one over here as an exception, much simpler diagram. You know, interestingly, it's taken 2 years, but we kind of got there in the end. And that's basically what World Rugby's kind of released. So what anyone who took one look at the diagram 2 years ago could have gone, well, why don't you just do it this way, is actually what we've ended up with 2 years later. And it makes a whole lot more sense. So I think what we're saying is, do we have head contact? And that includes direct or indirect. And then we're going to look at the degree of danger. And we'll come back to this, is there foul play aspect as well. But isn't this a much simpler, better, more logical process for you to apply? And it makes it easier for community referees to apply this in real time, to sort of say, okay, let me get a sense of what is the decision that is in front of me. Am I looking at something where there's not a great degree of danger, or there is a great degree of danger, or something in the middle? And I think that where we've ended up with is a much better place for community referees to apply these kind of things. Yes, we've still got some mitigating factors, but they're fairly simple. and there's still a little bit of jargon there for the top level referees to apply, but I think we can all agree there's two designs World Rugby's done of the exact same information. I like this one because it's a little bit there's some clear text over here about the considerations between direct and indirect contact and high force versus low force. So has head contact occurred? Is there foul play? What is the degree of danger? And then we apply our mitigation if appropriate or not. Keeping in mind, and I do think that this is important, that clearly reckless acts, we're not mitigating from wherever they may be, in particular if they're red cardable offences. If something's clearly reckless, we're not applying mitigation to somebody that doesn't deserve it, which makes some sense. So what's the good news and what's the bad news here? Good news, much simpler process, makes sense. Really, as a community referee dealing with something that happens directly in front of you in real time, we've got two questions. Was the contact direct? And do we have and what is our degree of danger? And that is a much simpler way of thinking about these kind of incidents that come across your desk as a referee. And then we can work out whether we're at low, medium, or high for penalty, yellow card, or red card because of that. Secondarily, what's great about the current process is that it covers a wider range of scenarios. So previously it was a high tackle framework, and people were like, well, do we apply this at like dangerous cleanouts or, various different charges or whatever that might be? And in particular, one of the first questions that was asked by the high tackle framework was, have we got a shoulder charge here, or have we got a high tackle? Well, now we're simply saying this process applies to both. And there's no change to the approach with shoulder charge, because by very definition, if you're going to shoulder charge someone to the head, we're probably looking at high force at this particular point in time. So, the notion that there can be a low force shoulder charge to the head is probably relatively unlikely. So there's no change to the previous process. We're just putting it into a much simpler framework. So there's some good news here. One, simpler process, smaller number of questions in a much more digestible way for us to think about, and covers a much wider range of instances in the game. Wherever you've got head contact, that you can rely on a couple of simple questions. Okay, do I have direct contact or do I have indirect contact, and what's my degree of danger here, to get the vibe of the incident to make the right decision. What's the bad news? I think the bad news is we've got this little red herring in here about, is there actually foul play? And I think that that's something that I don't want referees to necessarily take the bait on, which is to say, don't get too cute. So don't see something happen in front of you as a referee and go, sure, it looks like he's taken his head off, but I actually think that, based on X, Y, Z, that there isn't actually any foul play here, or I'm going to create or find reasons to say that there was no foul play here when everyone watching the game and the incident has reacted in a certain way. Many of you will know the principle of making the logical call, or referring to the expected outcome, sometimes people call it, or things like that. Another way of the same principle that I've been taught is, referees get held accountable for the decisions that they make versus decisions that they don't make. All of these kind of aspects are all true, and they all apply here in the sense of use your common sense that you've been given and make the logical call when it is in front of you. Don't get too cute about trying to apply principles to let people off the hook for actions. The issue about is there foul play is very much around when you slow something down or you look at it in a certain way, you kind of go, well, actually, what else could the player have done? Or, is there actually some, has the defending player done something wrong here that they could have done differently? And if we decide that they really couldn't, well, we can play on. Now, what's interesting is play on is something that World Rugby puts in a framework, but you as a referee confronted with an issue on a Saturday, you're not going to play on if there's some massive incident that everyone reacts to and you go, oh no, play on, I've made my decision here. So what they're describing is they're describing a scenario where they put something up on the big screen and they actually work out through, the various different aspects. This is actually a play on scenario. Great. We can go back, explain it to everyone, make sure that everyone's clear from both teams and the crowd and the people watching at home, whatever it is. I've explained it. This is what the scenario is. Now we can restart with a scrum or whatever. The opportunity to do that at community rugby is not there. And I would challenge you that if you're good enough to spot, no foul play in some of these scenarios, God bless you. You're a legend. But more than likely, you're going to have to provide some kind of sanction for a case that looks obviously sanctionable. I know World Rugby sent one video out of something that was considered play on, and my goodness, if any community referee had played on from that, I would have yanked their qualifications toot the sweet and basically said, come on, champion, what are you doing? So yes, we slow it down inch by inch and we see, okay, maybe there was a different decision that we can make here, or the player can't be held 100% accountable. So that's my encouragement. Don't get distracted too much by this extra step of, is there foul play? It's there for a good reason, which is to say we shouldn't be holding players accountable for things that they haven't done or couldn't have done differently. But our ability to detect that kind of stuff live is going to be fairly restricted, and we're going to cause more problems for ourselves if we try to get too cute around that stuff. The other bad news is that World Rugby listed an entire page of trigger words. This was this document here where trigger words from match officials. I don't know, but a document like this gives me triggers me to have various pains of different types. Not necessarily the triggers I think that World Rugby were expecting, but I kind of look at this and go, we're asking way too much of people to think about this kind of stuff in real time. This is very useful if you're at the professional level, and we've got some key terms that if the TMO uses it, or a touch judge uses it, or assistant referee, or a referee uses it, okay, now we know where we're going and we know what we're thinking, so that we're, again, using common language. If you try to spit all of this out on a Saturday, I think you're holding yourself to too higher expectation. I think if we just concentrate on direct or indirect degree of force, you'll be killing it. Is what I would suggest. So a little bit of a summary here, and then we'll see how we go for some questions. So player safety, number one priority. So that's part of why I say don't get distracted by this red herring about is there foul play. Like, absolutely every decision you make on the pitch must have player safety as its first priority at a community level or at a professional level or whatever level you're refereeing. I hope we can all agree on that. That's something that's a pretty simple kind of ask, but if you go out on the pitch and know my job in applying the head contact process is to have the safety of the players as my number one priority, you are more likely to make the correct decision than if you go into the game thinking, oh, I've got to apply a crazy set of frameworks to what I'm seeing in front of me. Just center yourself on my job is to keep the players safe, and you'll be amazed how often you actually make the right decision as opposed to worrying too much about what the framework is. So my encouragement is don't try to overcomplicate things. Learn the framework so that you know what it is and you can apply it, but then trust your instincts. At a certain point, we have to trust the referees that are out on the pitch doing their job. And I think the moment that you start doubting yourself or double thinking about things or whatever is when you start getting things wrong. So trust your instincts. If you see a thing and you go, that looks like a yellow card, guess what? Chances are it's a yellow card. If you look at something and you go, holy crap, that's a red card, then that is probably a red card, because that is probably what everyone else is thinking at the same time as well. And I think, and I don't want to suggest that there's some kind of, you know it when you see it kind of thing that only a few people can kind of tell. because I think that acts as a kind of, a little bit of a gatekeepery kind of aspect that, you can tell by feel or something like that. I think there is a framework that has specific steps that allows you to reach the same decision. What I'm encouraging you is don't let a kind of a theoretical process override your gut feeling and your instinct as a referee and a watcher of rugby and a lover of the game, if you find yourself in that situation. So that's what I hope I've made clear what I'm trying to get at from that point of view. All right, it's now been 25 minutes, so I reckon we watch some clips and get everyone out there doing some stuff. What do we think? Have we got any questions or anything, Chris, that we want to talk about first, or where are we going?
Yeah, I think a lot of questions will come through the clips, but before we get into watching some clips, because I know visuals are good for most. Yeah, if you've got any questions, feel free to fire them into the chat right now. The only thing I'll throw over to you, Jamie, is we've got some coaches on the call and some people who still cross the white line with the intent of actually tackling people, not referees. But so how would you explain this to the way players and coaches should approach playing and coaching the game? What changes? Is there anything to consider? What advice would you give to the community rugby coach before they go out and train their next contact session?
I think this is a crucial question that is coming up at the moment. In particular, it's a fascinating question because there's another sport very similar to rugby called rugby league, which is big in Australia, and they are a little bit behind the times when it comes to this kind of stuff, and they're just starting to reach there. And we recently had a player suspended in Australia for a bunch of weeks and was interviewed immediately afterwards and said, well, I shouldn't have to change my technique just because they changed the rules for the beginning of this year. My tackling technique's been what it's been for how many years, and I've been playing the game. Why should I have to change what I'm doing just because they changed the rules? Which was a fascinating kind of approach. And it kind of makes, a certain amount of perverse sense. I've been doing this for however long. This is my technique. Why do I have to change to address what is now the approach? And I think the answer to that is pretty simple, which is to say, there's two aspects to this. One is the effectiveness of the tackle itself, and the second is the protection of both the ball carrier and the tackler. So if we look at injury statistics, in a lot of cases, the injury that we see is an injury, in fact, to the tackler, not the ball carrier. So the head contact process is certainly designed to protect the ball carrier because we're looking at places where that player is at risk of contact. But what we see is that World Rugby's approach in the last couple of years has been to lower the tackle height for the protection of both players, both for the effectiveness of the tackle, because effectively what do we want to do in most cases? We want to get the tackler to ground so we can compete for the ball. Best way you can do that is by getting the player on the ground, not by necessarily smashing against them and putting him to next Thursday. That doesn't necessarily achieve the goal that we want as a coach or a player, as a team. Yes, there's an intimidation factor associated with that, but it's tactically okay. But ideally, we want to get the player to ground. We want to compete for the ball. We want to get a turnover. We want the ball to score points. Secondarily, for the protection of the players themselves, World Rugby's been moving to move that tackle height lower. So from a technique point of view, I don't think that players need to be, or coaches really need to be obsessed about the head contact process per se. I think that process is very much a referee thing that is a referee, something that they need to worry about. I think from the player's point of view and the coaching point of view, the encouragement has to be to constantly get players' technique to lower the tackle height, because for anyone who's looked into the statistics or the research, Ross, I can't think of his name. Ross, who works for World Rugby, who does all their medical stuff. Met him a bunch of times. Great guy. You can see all of the medical research they've done indicates that the concussion rates are higher when both players going into the tackle are high, because that's when the contact happens that results in a greater number of concussions. You may have read or heard that World Rugby is even trialing competitions where players are getting yellow card warnings for contact where they go into the tackle high and contact the opposing player high. They've just been trials at this point. Don't know how that's going to go in terms of encouragement into the wider game. But from a coaching point of view, you can see the direction that rugby is going, and that is lowering the tackle height. So we may as well get on board if we want rugby to continue as a game with players, for the next 50 years. That is the approach that we're going to have to take in order to get there. So from a technique point of view, I think that the contact process shouldn't necessarily dictate any change of tactic or any change of technique from any individual coach or player. But the overall direction that rugby is headed, because of head injuries being a thing and because of all the research that's been done, suggests lower the tackle height, and you'll be much better off from both a playing, coaching, and match officiating point of view. I don't know. Does that address the question?
No, 100%, Jamie. And we've got a couple of good questions coming in. One from BK, one from Sarah. Thank you very much for those. I feel like some of the clips you're going to show would actually shed some more context on those questions. So let's hang on to them for now. We crack on with the clips if we can.
All right, let's look at the clips, and we'll, if we don't deal with anything, we'll come up with them later. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put into the chat. Have we got ability to talk into the chat now? Yes, we do. Oh, no, I don't. I can only send to BC.
Should be good now, Jamie.
Everyone, excellent. Everyone wants this link. Okay, we're going to play the first. I'll give you a link to a YouTube video. I hope. All right, go and watch that. In the meantime, I'm going to put on the screen a little link I want you to go to on your computer where you can vote on what you think the answer is for this particular clip. So if you go to slido.com and put in that number, maybe do this on your phone while your other computer is doing what you need to. We've got here the first clip. So we've got a bunch of options: play on, penalty kick, yellow card, red card, or penalty try and yellow card. That sounds extreme. So go for your life, watch the first clip, and put in your decision. We'll see what everyone thinks. I'm going to watch this myself. Oh, yeah. All right, I think we've got 9 people vote so far. Someone's gone play on. There we go. I'm delighted to see that. So let's see. We've had 13 votes so far. How many we got on the call here?
27 at the moment. So
Okay.
I see we're at 16.
We'll wait till we get to the 20s, and then we'll.
Yeah.
17 voted. All right. So I won't play the video on the call because I won't play the video on the call because you can all see it on your YouTube window. I'll just talk to it. So we've got a 71% reckon yellow card, and I think that 71% of people is spot on the money. I will add that the answers, so to speak, for all of these clips have come from World Rugby. So World Rugby has approved the correct answers in for want of a better term. There is some room here, I think, to move to penalty kick, given the low degree of force and the reflexivity of the action from the player. But given that we've got a bit of a swinging arm involved here, and the degree of force is, I would say that we've got a degree of force here that's medium. This is not a high degree of force. This is not a lot. It's also not a glancing blow. We've got direct contact. That's a medium level of force. Leaves the issue to be yellow card. The only mitigating factor you might consider is because of the reflexive nature of the action from the player, and the lack of intent. Perhaps that might help you out as well. But you could possibly get away from with a penalty kick, depending on maybe the tenor of the game, something like that. But I think we can all 71% of people have got this one right. So a late vote coming in there for yellow card after we've said yellow card is correct. And I think that's the correct way to do these kind of things as well. All right, let's move on to the second poll. So the second question, I'll put the clip into the chat now. If I can find the chat. Here's our second clip.
Jamie, actually, a good question coming in. Are you able to put up the simplified head contact process graphic on the screen as folks watch the clip? That might be helpful for some folks who are not familiar with the head contact process yet.
Sure.
Bear in mind, we haven't had a contact game of rugby in the province since the head contact process came out.
Sure. Is it up on screen now?
100%. Thank you.
Interesting. Are people able to see the results on the app as they go? So I don't need them on the screen. Yeah, they can see the results on the app. Okay. So we've got a bit more balance here this time between penalty kick and yellow card. So we've had another 17 votes. So, and penalty kick has won out. And according to World Rugby, that is the correct answer. So this actually, if you slow it down, this particular clip, the player actually starts low, and the initial contact point is actually on the shoulder. So we have here indirect contact and pretty low actual force, because the player kind of ducks underneath the tackle. We don't actually have a huge amount of contact. And the first contact is made on the shoulder. He wraps around the head. Do we need to penalize this? Yes. But the argument is that based on the fact that there's indirect contact and a low degree of force, that would be a penalty kick only. I would say if you saw that in a community game and decided to give the player a yellow card, I don't think too many people would have a huge issue with that. But hey, we've got the footage. You can see the footage. The whole part of this exercise is to apply the framework to what we can see. So that's the correct decision there. All right, let's go to the third clip.
Just another day in the top 14. Hey, Jamie.
Yeah, that's a bit of arbitrage video coming up here. So far we're at, let's see, we've had how many votes? $14 votes. Few yet to come. 16. Righto. Currently we're running, oh, we've got 19, so we've got an extra few people. Glad you could join us. So far we're running at 100% red card. Even the person that played on from that first clip is giving this a red card, and I am I'm delighted by that. So yeah, I think we're all on the same page here. This is a shoulder charge. This is shoulder contact. We've got direct contact to the head. Because it's a shoulder, it's definitely going to be it's you know, we're not mitigating in this situation because we've got high force. Also, there's certainly no lowering of the player height. If anything, this guy had to go up to make contact as high as he did. So pretty simple decision to be made there, and everyone's got that spot on. Okay, let's go to number 4. This is an interesting one. So we've got a lot more variation in the decision making here. I've had 16 votes so far, 17. Waiting for the last couple. All right. I think the power of the crowd is doing well in all of this. So World Rugby's correct answer for this, if you want to call it a correct answer, is yellow card. And the reasoning, if we approach that at the framework, we actually have clearly indirect contact but high force. So and in addition, there's absolutely no mitigating factors here because this is effectively a late tackle. So we've got aspects of this which is late, and we have indirect contact. So the first point of contact is on the shoulder, bumps up, but there's clear contact to the head after that. So you've got an indirect contact, but you've got a high degree of force. Given that the fact that the player is going into the tackle with a swinging arm and the fact that the tackle is late, we're going to have no mitigation on that. So that's why we end up with yellow card. So the point made in the chat from Andy saying first angle was play on, blindside showed subsequent head contact. I think that's probably correct, which is the moment you actually see the correct angle, you can see the right outcome there. Okay, good, interesting little clip, that one. Okay, last one in this little group of 5. We moved on to the 5th one, and I'll put this one in the chat now. it's always great when the spectrum of rugby decisions knowledgeable people can agree on is both red card and play on. That's always it's always great when you see at least the range of options given there include both of those. But again, the wisdom of the crowd here, given most people have now voted, wisdom of the crowd is correct here. So this one is a penalty kick scenario. Why? This is what was called under the previous framework a seatbelt tackle, but if we apply the head contact process, do we have foul play? Yes, we do. This is a high tackle. It's over the level of the shoulders. We've got kind of direct contact, but it's indirect contact, but the force is very, very low. So we're looking at a penalty kick only. There's the degree of danger in this particular tackle is low. It is still foul play. It still needs to be sanctioned, but we're talking about a penalty kick situation here. All right. We've seen a range of things there, both penalty kick, yellow card, and red card. Do you want to, Chris, your call? Do you want to do a couple more, or do you want to leave it there, or go to questions? What's your what do you want to do?
Well, Jamie, if we could, there's one question was previously asked that I would fire your way, and then if that's all right, we can maybe jump into some of the ball carrier clips, if that's all right.
Okay.
Just because that's something that has been added to the process, so to speak. But the question that was addressed previous was that idea of that consideration of the intentional factor. Previously there was especially in the community level, there was a rather large discouragement universally of using that language. How much of that, intentional factor or intent of the person making the contact, would you recommend we factor into how we make decisions and how we prepare?
Interesting. I think I think judging intent is always tricky, because how do you judge intent as a referee? Yet we are routinely requested to judge intent. Intentional lock-ons, intentional infringement, intentional this, intentional that. It's a law of the game that you can't intentionally infringe. So, there's always the judgment call about whether something is intentional or not. To the extent that you see an action that you think is intentional, I think that immediately stops you from any process of mitigation. So, and may, depending on the level of the game that you're at and the community level that you're at, may in fact act as an aggravating factor. So if you look at a particular thing and you think, I think that this act is intentional, it may find yourself moving up from a penalty kick to a yellow card, or from something that you could possibly play on into a penalty kick situation, simply to make a point to a player. And that's perfectly reasonable, because I think when you're dealing with issues of intentionality, we come back to the fundamental point about player safety, which is that you can't have players playing the game whose intention is to injure or harm other players. And that's a point at which that's a line that we can't cross when it comes to safety. So, those players, if we think that that's what's happened, those players shouldn't be on the field, right? So I think that's kind of the way that I would approach that. I don't know if do you agree?
Yeah, no, and the only other term I've heard in the community level to help guide that, because obviously access to replay and often having to make decisions from compromised positions in the community level, forward shapes and running lines aren't as neat as we see on television. There's players that are maybe getting up off the ground from two faces earlier and they get in your way. But the best language I've heard to describe what that no other factor should be considered, like the language is used, situation would look like, would be, that no doubter. You see someone coming into the side of a ruck to try and, remove someone who's on the wrong side, and they're doing it with a shoulder. That's a no doubter. I mean, should the player have been lying on the wrong side? No, but we can't be flying into rucks, with our shoulders. So I think those intentional situations, for lack of a better term, often occur in those situations where we don't expect someone to normally make that contact, but then we see them running from miles away. And a very good example to cross sporting codes would be the Mark Scheifele hit in the Montreal Canadiens game, for those of you who follow hockey. watching the player fly in from so far away after a goal was scored. That's the kind of situation where we would maybe throw that language in. But aside from that, and the community game, Jamie, I 100% agree with your description. If we just simplify the process, usually those things will jump out as no doubt situations.
All right, I think just to finish up, what I'm going to do is put in, because I think we're going through all of the poll stuff, given where we're at with time. I think what I've put in here is a link. If you just go to that page, I just want to show you the specific stuff which you may or may not have seen from World Rugby, specifically on the issue that Chris brought up, which is there's a couple of videos here that I think would be worthwhile you having a look at. Certainly from a coaching and playing point of view, this is probably this is one area where there's a possible change, because it's the ball carriers requirements, as opposed to the high tackle framework previously was very much about the tackler, whereas this aspect of it is a good point to raise for those of you who are coaches or players, looking at what are the expectations of how the ball carrier can fend or defend themselves or attack the opponent or any of those kind of actions. And there's a range here showing no sanction, penalty, yellow card, and red card that I think will be useful for you to see the different aspects of those. And really, we apply the same process there, which is to say, do we have direct or indirect contact, and do we have the force and speed? What does that look like? So to get to your outcome. I think maybe there's an opportunity for coaches to talk to ball carriers just to let them know that perhaps this is one area that might be refereed slightly differently than has been in the past. Because I think more people are going to be aware of it, and the fact that, yes, the ball carrier has a responsibility as well. Can you fend? Yes. What you can't do is throw your elbow or forearm into some person's head. And I think that's a distinction that is pretty clear in these clips, but is a good one to make clear to players what you can do, what you can't do. At any rate, they're a good range of clips there to make clear that particular issue, because I do agree that is a bit of a curly one that is perhaps less commonly thought of, but now that is a scenario that's also applied. I mean, the only other one, perhaps just so we do full coverage, is I didn't put any clips of head-to-head contact. Head-to-head contact will be one of those scenarios where often you may have a play-on situation where you simply have a head clash where two players can't avoid it. There's some clips here on World Rugby as well of just where players, either they're jumping for the ball or they're in a tackle, and sometimes two players from the same team end up braining each other. Those kind of things are not considered foul play. Again, we go back to the framework. So I think maybe that's where is there foul play may come into to play at a community level, where you look at something and go, that's an accidental head clash. We can play on from that. It's just an unfortunate accident. There are those situations in the game, and it's worthwhile being aware of that as well. All right. Any more questions, issues, anything anyone else wants to discuss?
I will throw it open to the floor. If you want to fire it into the chat, feel free to do so, just because we are running up on an hour. But yeah, anything anyone wants to bring up regarding these clips or all things head contact process, fire away. Well, an interesting question coming in, Jamie. Are you allowed to consider, and I'm going to ask it to you from the context of an on-field community referee. Are you allowed to consider the result in terms of an injury into the process? Is the player bouncing up and playing on versus the player being carried off? How much does that factor into your decision at the end of the day?
Great question. So, I think this has an interesting answer. I think the answer is yes, it does. but possibly not in the way that you might think. I think that it acts as a potentially aggravating but not a mitigating factor. In other words, if you just get lucky that the player you just coat hanged gets up happy, I don't think that that's a positive for you. But if you do something that is against the laws and we have a bad outcome from that, I think that it is the nature of life that you assume the consequences of something, even if those consequences aren't necessarily what you intended. So if you go out and you go to some bar and you punch someone and you didn't know that they had a brain aneurysm or whatever, and you kill them, you don't just say, well, if I'd punched anyone else, they would have been just fine, right? You're up for murder. Similarly, from a rugby perspective, if you go to judiciary, one of the clear things in World Rugby's process is what happened to the player that you tackled. So it is definitely taken into account at a judicial perspective, the consequences on the player. Having said that, I think you can go too far with this, and I think it plays into your decision making in some respects, but I think it can be considered an aggravating factor for sure. That would be my answer. So I don't think it jumps something from a penalty kick to a red card, or it will either cement the decision or it will bump a decision up a sanction, I think, based on the outcome to the player on the ground. I suspect some people would disagree with that. I'm very happy for people to disagree with me. I'm not some kind of oracle. I'm just telling you what I think is the right answer from a rugby perspective, and what's the right answer, from a reality perspective. That's just the way that it works. Happy to hear people arguing back if they want to. That's half the fun of rugby, right?
And then just to clarify, for those of you on the call, we have some citing and judicial folks on the call, and that's something that they have to consider, just because they are dealing with things that happen after the fact. And actually, a very good way of describing how citing and judicial works, because I've had conversations with citing and judicial experts before, and sometimes I disagree, but they said to me something that stuck with me for a long time, in that, Jamie, when we're refereeing a community game or any game for that matter, our job as a match official is to manage that game. Our citing and judicial folks, their job is to manage the game. Week in, week out, they're dealing with precedents, so they're under a lot more pressure to consider all of the evidence available, and that includes alternative camera angles, medical reports. There have been many incidents that have been, thought to have been dealt with one way, but evidence comes to light and they're dealt with differently afterwards. So
people don't understand that about judicial processes, that things as simple as the way that the player presents to the judiciary, what their past record is, all of those things, you have no idea about that as someone looking from afar. You don't know how what evidence was tendered. Every judicial case is seen on its own merits. So I think, that's a great point to make, which is to say, people sometimes look at consistency in judicial and they go, hang on, this tackle here got 3 weeks and this guy got 7 weeks. And you go, how's that fair? And you go, well, if you saw the way that the person reacted at the judiciary, or the way that they spoke to people, or the fact that they had no remorse, or the fact that they had, 4 yellow cards in the last year, or that had a previous record, or that the medical report said X, Y, Z, then that explains it, but people don't normally see that from the outside.
And the nice thing about being a referee is most of that is not your problem, which is great. But there is if you Google World Rugby Regulation 17, there's some light 117-page reading if you want to go through all things, including all the factors that are considered in those outcomes. And actually, not being cynical, there's actually a really good table on just how not unlike this graphic, but a little bit more complex, obviously dealing with all spectrum of foul play. And it's really helpful for, if you're a player or a coach and you wonder like, oh, how come that guy got, 4 games versus this guy's getting 12? It's valuable insight if you've got the time. Well, Jamie, I'll leave it there. We're coming up on 7. You've been more than generous with your time. Thank you very much. And what I do have is, I've got all your video clips and when I send the recording out to everyone that's registered, because we did have 52 registrants, 27 made it on the call, which is great. So I will send out that recording as well as those video clips. And yeah, there's links to these graphics as well, which have finally been put in one place on the World Rugby website. So again, Jamie, on behalf of the rugby community in BC, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, I hope we can do something again together soon. Maybe not separated by an ocean and an internet connection.
Yeah, I hope you guys get back to gameplay soon, and we're back doing what we love, which is being part of rugby. So I hope everyone's looking forward to getting back out there as soon as they possibly can, given the various different conditions and what can happen. So all the best to everyone, and enjoy your time on the pitch. Keep players safe, use common sense, and enjoy the greatest game. How good.
Thanks, Jamie. And just before we sign off, everyone, we will be revisiting all things player welfare before we get back to contact as part of our return to contact, as players and coaches will be doing it. We will as well. We'll make that available to the general public, the rugby public as well, just so we can all get on the same page, because there will be some heartache. We will have a hard time getting on the same page when we do get back on the field, but hopefully we can use some of what Jamie's all of what Jamie's given us today as a starting ground for when we try to approach our return to contact in a couple of months' time. But thanks again, everyone. And if you have any follow-up questions or comments, you know where to find me, cassmus@bcrugby.com, website, socials, all kinds of stuff up there for you to keep up to date. And again, fire any questions my way. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.